Welcome to Live from Lockdown Library, presented by Bookworm Goa, with your hosts Nayan and Anandita. This is a series of conversations with book and library people where they share their responses to the ongoing global crisis. We're talking social distancing from a community perspective, we're talking access to books and storytelling, but in quarantine. The hope here is to find ways together to reimagine the library, to think of it as a vital, evolving, transcendent space that can both hold and give voice to this moment of intense uncertainty. Presenting live from Lockdown Library.
Hi, I am Nayan, a library educator. I will be your host for this episode of Lockdown Library. Today, we are honored to be speaking to Mridula. Mridula Koshy started the Community Library Project, known as TCLP, in New Delhi in the year 2014, with the intention of creating a free, inclusive, citizen-led, and publicly owned space for all to access books. She believes in the power of books and libraries. Thanks for joining us today in Lockdown Library.
Well, thank you for having me.
So Mridula, as you must have seen that since the COVID-19 pandemic triggered a lockdown, we have been confined to our homes and the internet. And over the past 7 weeks, we have witnessed an explosion of online story-related content, be it storytelling, book reading, author talks, podcast, and many other such activities. We library educators live in a world of story-related content even in the time before the lockdown. So this was our normal. What do you think about this sudden abundance of online content in the field of library work?
Nan, I noticed within the first few days of the lockdown that many who are involved in particularly book publishing, but also some people in the education sector were beginning to offer free content. But having a practice, which is a working library with around 4,000 members, we have certain truths that keep anchoring us. So for us, the truth is that English does not work as a language for our members in which to access all of this free content. Probably within a few days after that, we woke up to how many other ways in which people were unable to access this free content. Chief among those was the fact that there is a digital divide in our country, probably in the world, and many people lack access to the digital world, either lack of know-how or devices themselves or internet. As the lockdown has continued, this divide has been exacerbated, not just through inaction, but through action. Inaction means, for example, there's an opportunity here to make free Wi-Fi available. And we are pushing governments. We had a campaign, it's still ongoing, Internet Kholo, in which we are urging the Delhi government to open up internet to our members and everybody else. There is action, along the lines of free content, which is exclusively geared toward a minority of people. And that can be an issue of language, but it can also be an issue of the kind of content that's being made available. While in our library practice, we find that the role of the read aloud is key to opening books. We have members who enter the world of books at a later age than many of the private school educated children. And we noticed that the kind of read alouds that are offered tend to be for really young children. So in addition to being in English, it may be also restrictive in that it is geared toward a certain understanding of who is available for this read aloud. So these are multiple ways in which I think we have tried to engage in a discussion, whether it is with the government or with the private sector, with publishers, with the book world at large, and with other librarians, about the importance of continuing some of the practices that worked in the physical library. The practice of read aloud is chief among them, while simultaneously locating this moment in the kind of political exclusion that our members were previously experiencing also. So when you talk about how because we're located in the book world, are already familiar with the world of stories and so on, It's also important to note we're also familiar with our membership being excluded. And this is not a minority of people who are being excluded. This is a majority of people. So the onus on us to have an agenda that pushes against this exclusion means that we continue to see the world of books as a world that's exclusive. We continue to agitate against that exclusion.
I would like to know how you are reaching to the readers whom you are associated with through TCLP. What initiatives you have taken to reach out to the community and to children who are not able to visit the libraries and are on the other side of the digital divide?
So this particular program we've created is a WhatsApp-based library, Dunya Sabki. Dunya Sabki in Hindi means the world belongs to everyone. That's not exactly a literal translation, but that is what we mean when we say Dunya Sabki. So the WhatsApp-based library is because we found that the majority of the members who we contacted through these phone calls, for which we employed scripts that had to do with getting information to people who need information, and our members needed information about ration and government resources to help them weather this storm. We needed information also about what kinds of access they had, and we found that the most popular and most widely used technology or app is WhatsApp. And we also found that many people did not have devices that were, smart. They did not have smartphones. And so our library, which is located in WhatsApp, also has the ability to, in addition to using a familiar technology, to use as little data as possible. We are hopeful in the long run to be able to adapt it for use for people who don't have access to smartphones. We're not quite there yet, but we're working on that. The heart of the library is the read aloud, because the heart of our physical library, which always maintained like a 7-to-1 ratio of books to members, and we have thousands of members, so we have tens of thousands of books. The heart of those libraries, while the collection was important, was nevertheless in the practice of the read aloud, which is where the book is opened and people read to one another. I don't just mean that I read to little children, I read to big children too. And I mean that big children read to little children. So in Dunya Sabki, we've continued that practice.
We are also witnessing many of our library partners, field organization, and committed literacy groups engaging with relief work. We feel that often they are the first call organization in their area, and this is what they must do because it's of urgency and relevance. They feel that this is what they should be responding at the moment. What do you think about this in light of our vision for libraries?
And yes, it's true that when we first started calling people and when we first started receiving calls from people, in most instances, the first moments of the conversation were around people's anxiety to do with food, to do with shelter, to do with getting home. I think we have tried to be clear-sighted about the possibility that we need to be more than one thing. I think libraries as a concept or conceptually, libraries are wonderful for their great flexibility, because if they are about connecting people to the information they seek, then they can serve in all sorts of situations. And we worked very hard to connect members to resources like government, doled out ration, daily meals. In all of this work, we've tried to be clear-sighted about understanding that what we are doing is within the realm of the library. I do understand that there is this tension that people are feeling within our organization. Also, we've experienced this tension of, is it right for us to do this and not book work? And I think that we have resolved that by understanding that we need to do both. And the reason to do both is because people require both. They don't necessarily require one first and the other second, and it's meaningless to engage in that kind of dichotomous view. It's important to understand. It's more important to understand they need both. We are capable of both, and we will work for both. If you don't mind, I just want to go
Yeah,
briefly
yeah,
back to the digital question. And this is just to say that
yeah.
we in the Community Library Project always pushed against the idea of India providing libraries to its citizens through digital medium. We fully embrace that in this moment we need to work digitally because of physical distancing. But we want to caution library practitioners everywhere, as we caution ourselves, that digital is not enough for our members.
What has given you strength and purpose during this time?
So I think I have leaned very heavily on my colleagues in this, knowing that I don't have to do this work alone, that other people are working with me. My colleagues can include members of the library because there are member leaders. My colleagues can include volunteers who work in other professions but enter the library to work side by side with librarians. And I think maybe most importantly, my fellow librarians. I just find other people's resilience builds my resilience. And I've leaned pretty heavily on that.
Thanks for sharing that. Uh, so my last question to you is, we trust that many of our listeners are library workers and library educators. Do you have a thought or message that has been illuminating for you?
Libraries reflect the kinds of inequities and failings of the society in which they're constructed. When the protest library movement got going in Delhi and beyond, where protest libraries sprang up on sidewalks, that was such a moment of us understanding that history and politics produces the libraries that we create, and that as history and politics acts through us, we must interrogate and understand that it is acting through us, so that we don't trip up as often as we might, so that we can catch ourselves and self-correct. I would, I think, say that this moment in time is a moment in history where we must be ready to interrogate who we are and what we are creating.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mridula, for sharing your thoughts and experiences. It was indeed our pleasure
Thank
to
you for
host you
inviting me,
today.
Nayan and Bookworm Trust. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks a lot for joining us.
This has been an episode of Live from Lockdown Library. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.